Hi, everybody. It's Michael Angelo Caruso. We're here with episode 19 of my podcast, and I'm delighted and so pleased to have a very special guest with me today. This is Dave Sanderson. Hi, Dave. How are you?
Good afternoon, Michael. How are you doing today?
Doing fantastic. Dave and I met at a conference that we both spoke at on the East Coast. And I must confess, I didn't know his name, but I certainly know who he was because he was involved with one of the defining moments of the first part of this decade. This was not just a local story or a regional story or even a national story. This was something that everybody in the world tuned into. It didn't last but a few minutes, Dave. How long?
Approximately 6 minutes.
6 minutes. It captivated all types of humanity. And of course, it's changed your life in a dramatic way. Ladies and gentlemen, Dave Sanderson is the last passenger off of the airplane that landed in the Hudson River. And he's going to tell us his story, and then we're going to draw some relevant type topics from it here in just a minute. Dave, it was such a pleasure to see you speak. You've been speaking about this for quite some time.
I started about a week after this happened on January 15, 2009. So it's been about 9 years. I've had the opportunity, in honor and privilege, as you know, to take the stage and be able to share a little bit about a miracle.
We're going to get the story. Actually, you can tell this thing in about real time in 6 minutes, man. I never thought of it that way. But I wanted to ask, in the 9 years you've been speaking about this, Dave, how did the talk change? What was it initially, and then what was the version of the talk I heard just a couple of weeks ago? It has to have transformed.
That's a great distinction, because when I first gave it, it was the week after the plane crash, and candidly, I did not anything what I was going to say. I had to actually pray to say, give me something to say. So how it's really evolved is, I had sort of what happened to me, and I didn't have all the ancillary sort of aspects of it, and so I had the opportunity over the last several years to meet other passengers, meet first responders, meet the captain and first officer, meet a lot of people in the media, and I started putting these pieces of the pie together. So it basically has evolved from to say, this is what happened to me that day, to this is sort of the bigger story. And then it started evolving to all these lessons and strategies that I use that day that can not only work that day, but also can work in business and your personal life.
That's terrific. And I imagine along the way, you've become a much better speaker. As someone who teaches speaking, presentation skills, that sort of thing, I just know just doing something more often. I think it was Dale Carnegie said, if you want to get better at something, just do it more often. But then when you're consciously trying to do it better, as Malcolm Gladwell pointed out in his book Outliers, when he talked about 2,000 hours being a standard of expertise, you actually get better at communicating it and more natural, and you're learning more what we call in the business speaker tricks and that sort of thing. I thought your presentation was amazing. And I was watching the audience because they were they'd never heard anybody tell a story like this before. Would you do us the honor and the privilege of running down the story again, what happened to you that day, and try to give us some scope and some sense of the horror. And then, of course, it ends all happily, doesn't it?
Most definitely. So here's a short version of my my talk. So, I wasn't supposed to be on that plane. I was scheduled to be on the 5 o'clock flight that night. So I think I was supposed to be on that plane for a reason, and I gave up a first class seat on the 5 o'clock flight for seat 15A on flight 1549. So I gave up a first class seat, went back to my seat like everybody else does. Nothing unusual. I was one of the first set of passengers. Did not pay attention. I did not know where the exits were, did not read the instructions, did not know where all that stuff was going on. But I tell people now I do, because now I know how important it is to be aware on a plane. But it was about 60 seconds after we took off is when I heard an explosion on the plane. And candidly, I fly so often, I've never heard anything on a plane like that before. So it sort of woke me up and got my attention. And since I was in seat 15A, I had a window. So I looked out the window and I saw fire coming out from that left wing. And so I knew something had happened, but I fly so often, it still, back then flew 100 plus times a year. I just plain lost an engine. And it wasn't a big deal because I know that planes have multiple engines. And candidly, I knew the topography because I flew up there so much, that he's just going back to the airport. But as we know now, he wasn't circling to go back to the airport. He was circling to go back down the Hudson River. And, as soon as he crossed over the George Washington Bridge is when he said his famous words, "This is your captain, brace for impact." And that was the moment that and if you talk to some of the other passengers, I think they had a very similar response, knew it was serious. He said in the media, dire, I'll use whatever term he wants to use, but it was serious to me. At that point, I knew something was going on, because when I looked out that window, I looked down, you can see people's faces looking up. So we were very close to the bridge. And so once he cleared that bridge is when sort of things started kicking in, because it was about 60 seconds after that's when we crashed into the river. And of course, the real term is water ditching. But it felt like a crash because he hit it pretty hard. But that last minute, I tell people, is amazing because time slows down. And as I talked to other people who've gone through other experiences, in fact, we had a lady in our church who went through that earthquake in Haiti, who was down in her building for like 6 to 7 minutes. And she had a very similar experience. She thought she was going to die, and her whole life passed before her eyes. And so you sort of get a very clarity on what your life was all about very quickly. But once we got down and I sort of came back up and saw light, that was part one. But part two is when that water starts rushing in so quickly, because water started coming in from the bottom and the back of the plane. So where I was sitting towards the back of the plane, I was 4 rows behind that left wing. Water was about knee deep. And depending where you're on the plane, because the plane was sort of an angle in the water, front of the plane had about ankle deep, back of the plane had waist deep. So I was about knee level at that point. And my game plan, Michael, was just to get up, get out, get up to the aisle, get up and get out. But when I got to the aisle, that's when things started to change and evolve for me. That's when I heard my mother talking to me. And my mother had passed away in 1997, but there was something she would tell me when I was a child that just sort of came to me. And it said, if you do the right thing, God will take care of you. And I realized years later, after all this, as I started analyzing and thinking about it, I said, my mother never told me what to do. She always made me make a choice. And I think that's a lesson that I learned, and it's great because I don't think I give my kids enough opportunity to make choices. We tell them what to do because we want them to do the right thing. But my mother was like, you got to be able to make your choices and live up to those choices. And the best choice for me was to help other people. So I started climbing back over the seats to get behind, see if anybody needed help. And when I started making my way out, water was at that point about waist deep, and the bins had broken open. So it was like stuff was all over the place. But the first light that I saw was on the right side. And it was a 10F, that door at 10F. And like everybody else, I was diving out to go on the wing. But when I got out, I looked up, and there was no room on the wing or the boat for me. And that's why I was inside the plane about waist deep in 36-degree water for about 7 minutes.
Dave, let's frame this up for people who maybe don't remember this as well. And by the way, it's documented in the fantastic Tom Hanks movie, the title of which, was it Miracle on the Hudson?
Sully.
Sorry?
Sully.
Sully, thank you very much. Sully, named after the pilot of the plane. So you had already made your way out to exit the plane, and that's when your mother spoke to you, time to make some good choices here, and then that's when you were climbing the seats to go back again, to get behind.
That's correct. Yeah, because at that point, Michael, I knew that I was alive.
Yeah.
But I didn't know if anybody in the back what was going on, right? You just don't know what's going on because it's dark back there. So yeah. I was alive. I could handle myself, and I just made the decision. The right thing for me was to go back, see if anybody needed help, and that's all I did.
And then, so when you got out to the plane, you said there was no room for you on the wing. There was no room on the boat. Would you recast that for people that a boat had actually come up to help? And that you mentioned in your talk, that was a big part of the success story, because the plane is not something that floats for very long. And
no,
so
it was approximately 24 minutes before the back of the plane went down totally into the water. But that little lifeboat, what happens is when they open the door, that lifeboat comes out. Behind the wing. And that's that little lifeboat that you see behind that wing. And so that was already filled up with people, and the wing was already filled up with people. Yeah. So there was no room for either one for me to get out on. So at that point, I was alive and I had leverage. And so I was inside the plane, but then I heard people yelling at me to hold on, because what happened was, if anybody knows about the geography of that area, the Hudson River, it's got an extremely fast current, and the plane was actually floating down the river. And it was floated down, they estimated about a half a mile in about 24 minutes. So as that plane was floating down the river, that little lifeboat was floating out from the plane. And they didn't know, like I didn't, and probably you didn't until you heard me talk, it's tethered to the plane. But no one reads the instructions, right? So no one reads the brochure, so no one knows that. So that's why I was holding on to the lifeboat, because I had leverage inside the plane, waist deep in the water, And then all of a sudden, I sort of looked out in the wing and something caught my eye, and it was a lady. She's holding on to a baby. And I found out later she had 2 kids on this plane, and she had one on the lifeboat. But she wasn't moving, and I just yelled at her because everything that I've learned, Michael, is, and I've been in meetings, and people who are listening have been in meetings likewise, where you get stuck. You got to do something radical to break people out of that state, that locked state. And I just yelled at her to throw the baby. And candidly, I didn't think she was going to throw her baby, but I did get her attention. And she sort of looked at me like, who is this crazy man, right? I was like looking at me, who is this guy, right? But I got her attention, but another lady picked up on that and got the baby, and she jumped on the lifeboat. And then all of a sudden you look out and people are starting to walk on a wing, which was amazing. It was just, you saw people walking on a wing to all those great first responders at the end of the wing who were there within a couple minutes.
Yeah, and so you mentioned that you were wet. I imagine a lot of the other passengers were wet as well, correct? It was correct. A cold day. You said it was one of the coldest days of the year. Again,
11 degrees.
January of 2009?
Yeah, January of 2009. It was 11 degrees that day, and the water was 36 degrees. Which
it induces hypothermia very, very quickly. I understand you suffered from hypothermia when they took you to the hospital.
That's what they diagnosed you with. That's correct.
And so did everybody on the plane get wet?
I don't know if everybody got, I think everybody at least got their shoes wet, because you got to remember the front of the plane had less water than the back of the plane. So the people in the back of the plane got hit a lot worse with water than the front of the plane.
Before we got on today, I was looking at video footage of the people disembarking. I don't even know if that's a legitimate term based on what had happened to the plane, but they were disembarking the aircraft, which is now a boat craft. And the camera's so far away, you can't tell that people are wet. I was surprised when I heard you talk that you had said, well, the water was up to my knees, and I was in the water for long enough to have some physical manifestation. So it's interesting the details. That's why your talk was so fascinating, because the details of what happened were kind of lost to us through the ages or through the news, I suppose. Okay, so let's pick up your narrative. You're still on the plane. You're the last passenger off. I assume at least some of the crew is still on the plane.
That's correct. At least the captain and the first officer were still on the plane. And the reason I got off the plane, Michael, is because I felt the plane shift. And I found out later by interviewing and talking to some of the responders that a tugboat hit the front of the plane. And that's what caused the plane to shift. And when the plane shifted, water started sloshing back and forth. And then that's when I felt water go over my back. I'm like, this thing's going down, man. This is like the Titanic.
Wow.
And I remember from the Titanic, if you remember that movie, when that boat tipped up, it sucked everything down in at the bottom of the Atlantic. And it's like, do not be sucked down in a plane, right? I mean, this is the worst. That's the second worst thing that could happen. The first is fire. The second is you're in the water stuck in a plane down at the bottom of something. You can't get out. So that's why I said, I'm out of here. And I jumped,
And then just to finish up the story, they took everybody to the hospital, I assume, and released.
Nope. Not everybody went to the hospital. Only 11 people went to the hospital. 8 people went over to New York City hospitals. 3 of us went to New Jersey hospitals, which was Palisades Medical Center. Okay.
And nobody died. What was the worst of the injury? Was it hypothermia for somebody?
Mm-hmm.
You?
No, I think, the gentleman who was in the hospital with me, Barry, had fractured his sternum because of all the impact. But the flight attendant back, Doreen, when she was making her way out, sliced her leg, which I think was probably the worst injury. She sliced her leg open on one of the seats when she was coming up because she was underwater. So I think she probably was injured worse than anybody who was on that plane.
Right. And then, of course, I think it was the governor that coined the term "miracle on the Hudson." Yeah.
The governor of New York, about 7:30, 8 o'clock that night. And came out and says, this is truly a miracle on the Hudson. That's how it got its name.
Does Captain Sullenberger refer to it the same way? I know that he's talked about there was some level of skill involved here. Let's not forget that.
Definitely.
How do we account for that? Miracle, skill, fate. Do we need to account for it? Is it just a heady mix of good news?
I think everything came together, and candidly, I think there were a lot of miracles, like having the right captain and first officer up there with 40,000 hours of experience between them. Having not only the training and skill set, having the proper passenger makeup of the plane, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that came into this. Proper passenger makeup of the plane really was, I would say, that what transpired on the second half, which after he got it down, which made the whole thing happen, because the passenger makeup of the plane was roughly about 90% business people who could handle themselves. So the very limited. There are only a few variables.
I've been on flights to Orlando filled with kids and families and stuff. You're saying that would have not gone as well, probably.
Yeah, I think, in fact, I've talked to some other captains who said even if that could happen in Orlando, total different passenger makeup, just the opposite of New York, just the total opposite of New York, where you have maybe 4 or 5 business. I mean, I fly to Orlando on business. You do too. 4 or 5 of us are on there. The rest are family.
That's right. That's not my favorite flight.
Nope.
I've turned down speaking engagements in Orlando just for that reason.
Or I'll fly to Tampa to go to the drive to Orlando.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Anything not to be on that plane, man.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. So you've identified, and this was you getting, again, for my friends who are in the speaking business or doing presentations or interested in the delivery, how this all came together for you. You had some help with a lady named Cindy Wrightson, who is, I don't know, she's not exactly a co-author. It's just listed as with. I assume she gave you some help with assembling the ideas. Yeah, and you identified about 12.
She did, and I've known Cindy for many years, and Cindy's her main focus in life is content and content development and syntax to content. Okay. So she was great help putting all the content together and giving me a roadmap.
Excellent. And together you identified 12 salient, relevant lessons learned that anybody can apply through the lens of this near tragedy. Is that how you package the book?
That's a good way to package it, because what happened was after doing a lot of I basically spent 9 hours of audio recording everything that happened, and we came out and identified like these 12 different traits or skills or concepts, resources that I did and some other people did that can only are relative not only what happened that day, but also can be associated with what you do in business or in personal life, and that's how this whole thing came together.
I love it. So many times when we need to communicate important things, we need to be organized. We need to have it set up in our heads first. And you've done a brilliant job of that. I want to read the 12 qualities, and then I'd like to talk about a couple, 3 of them. Yep. Maybe the one that's most popular, or one that is surprisingly the least popular. Maybe that would be interesting to people. Okay. Here we are, everybody. Awareness, faith, certainty, responsiveness, state management. What is that, Dave?
How to manage your mind when all stuff's breaking loose. Put yourself in the right mindset.
Very good. Sensory acuity and communication, focus, anticipation, risk assessment, persistence, teamwork, and finally leadership. I mean, everybody needs all this stuff.
Everybody has these skills. It's a matter of how do you use those at the most critical times. And so the one that I love talking about the most is really sensory acuity, because that's what I learned by being around Tony Robbins. I was with him for many years as head of security. But seeing how he could communicate to people in different modalities, whether it was audio, visual, or kinesthetic primarily, and being able to connect with people. So that one skill set, like I mentioned, by how I yelled at the lady that day to throw the baby, that came from basically jarring her, but also came from I need to be in an auditory state, very auditory state. And so I had to go high auditory to do that. So the ability to be able to communicate in the modalities of the people you're dealing with, especially speakers. When we get on stage, right, the first thing, and one of the things I do is I look at the audience and say, okay, every modality is in this room. I've got to connect. So you see a video, right? You might hear some music, right? I mean, I have all these things coming together because I want to hit the right modalities for everybody in the room. That's
exactly right. We say, if you need to see it to believe it, I'm going to show you. You have a terrific video that introduces the segment. Right. If you need to hear it to believe it, I'm going to tell you. And if you need to feel it to believe it, I'm going to touch you, or I'm going to help you experience it through. And
I do that, if you notice, when I talk about my hospital experience.
Yes.
I get very, very kinesthetic at that in a hospital experience.
Yeah, I love it. So you like talking about,
I would say, the
acuity. Go ahead, Dave.
Sensory acuity, that's correct.
Which one?
I said, and the one thing that I would say to people, it's interesting to have more questions. Yeah.
Sorry, they have more questions about what?
I said the one that people a lot have questions are about risk assessment. And how to manage risk when all stuff's breaking loose around you, right?
Mm.
And it's like, to me, it comes from preparation. This sort of comes from the one things you talk about, having the humility to prepare, to have the confidence to execute.
Mm.
I mean, I've learned that statement years ago, and it's true. I think that's how I assess risk. Is if you're prepared mentally and what you've done, then assessing risk comes pretty easy. It's like, okay, what are my options? And one of the things I learned, if you have one thing, you don't have any options. If two things, you have the option, but three things, you have a choice. So everything that I do in risk assessments, I want to have three different things I can do, so I have a choice to make instead of having no choice or just an option.
Yeah. Where can people get the book and learn more about you? Is it the same website?
Well, they go to davesandersonspeaks.com. I will personally inscribe the book for them, or if they go to Amazon, they know it's an Amazon likewise, and Kindle version likewise, and also in hardback or softback format, and we're also working on Audible format right now.
Oh, I love it. One of the things you and I talked about after you were done is how surprisingly funny your presentation is. I found around me, people were laughing, and we talk in the business, we talk about different types of laughs. A 10 is a belly laugh with tears coming out of your eyes and you're falling out of your chair. And a 2 might be a smirk or a little chortle. You were getting like 7s and 8s, man. And afterward, you and I talked about it, that maybe part of it was that all these bad things are, you mentioned the 3 things that people fear most: fire, was it airplane crash, and then drowning?
Yeah, drowning, yeah.
They're happening in rapid succession, right, in the same 6-minute period. And the audience is just beside themselves because they're losing their minds, thinking, oh my gosh, what would I have done in this situation? There's a real, I guess they found it funny somehow. What did you tell me after the talk? You had a great observation about this.
Well, I don't know exactly what I told you, but what I think is when I speak is that I try to get people and put them in my seat so they can actually sort of live that experience through me. So, and when things are going sideways like they were, there are things that happen that you're out of control. And such as, when the doctor says, you go take your temperature anally, and all of a sudden people know exactly what that means, right? It's like, so they laugh, it's like, yeah, I know what that means. Start laughing. It's like, but that's that experience, right? It's like, you're there, you have no control, and all of a sudden something's happening that you don't want to happen, but hey, it's going to happen whether you like it or not. And all of a sudden people can relate. So once I think with great speakers, and you do this well, because I really liked what you did, because I tied some of the things you did in your talk to my talk, is that once you put them in your seat, all of a sudden you realize, yeah, you know what, I'd probably the same way. And, someone's coming with me, wants to take my temperature anally, all of a sudden, yeah, well, geez,
Yeah, a little background for people that aren't familiar with your speech, Dave. So is fire on the plane, and then the plane's going to crash or water ditch, and then there's a potentiality of drowning. And then when he gets to the hospital, the doctor says, make sure you take his temperature anally. And about this time, Dave really wakes up,
I understood what that meant, right? It's like everything else is going around me up here, but he said anally, and man, I knew what's coming now, man, right? I remember when my mother did that. It was no fun, right?
Yeah, fun. Well done, man. I really enjoyed your talk. I know that you and I are talking about doing some more things together, yes. and I'm sure we'll be on the platform together again sometime. If it happened once accidentally, it's almost certain to happen on purpose next time.
I love to do that. I think we can definitely, like we did last time, I think we can tie some of these messages together. And I'm really excited to have you on my daily flash briefing on Amazon. That's going to be exciting. So everybody's listening. Once that happens, Michael will put it out. We'll put it out. But check us out, because he's going to break down 5 of his topics on my daily flash briefing on Amazon in 5 minutes. Man, we're going to get to it. We're not going to mess around. In 5 minutes, Michael's going to break these things down for you.
Dave Sanderson Speaks is the website, everybody. It's a fantastic book. Moments Matter is the name of the book. Of course, it's all based on the true life movie that was produced called Sully. You know the story. Maybe you just don't know. Are you actually in the movie, Dave? Are you represented?
I had 3 cameos at the end, so you have to look really close and very quick. But I was very honored to be asked to be a part of it.
Oh, that's fantastic. So congratulations, not only on surviving an airplane incident, but also on your speaking career and all the good things that you've got going for yourself. You're going to touch a lot of people, man.
That's what we're trying to do, impact somebody's life every day.
Fantastic. DaveSandersonSpeaks.com, everybody. And thanks for being with us. We'll see you soon, Dave.